Greetings, fellow humans. Katrina here. Quick disclaimer, I'm a professional, not your professional. Nothing I'm about to say should be taken as medical, legal, or otherwise advice. This podcast is purely for education and amusement. That is it. Disclaimer over. So today I thought I'd talk about what I don't know about oxytocin. Now, there's a lot more out there about oxytocin that I'm not going to talk about. So remember, this isn't everything. This is just a little bit. And I thought I'd talk about the two faces of oxytocin. So this is an article by Tori DeAngelis. She's a writer in Syracuse, New York. And this will go through a couple of the different functions of oxytocin and some of the information around it. So here we go. If hormones could win popularity contests, oxytocin might well be queen of the day. Given oxytocin's connection to such life-affirming activities as maternal behavior, lactation, selective social bonding, and sexual pleasure, researchers have been working over time to uncover its role in the brain and in regulating behavior. Oxytocin is produced mainly in the hypothalamus, where it is either released into the blood via the pituitary gland or to other parts of the brain and spinal cord, where it binds to oxytocin receptors, and then this actually influences our behavior and physiology. So the excitement over the hormone began in the 1990s when researchers discovered that breastfeeding women are calmer in the face of exercise and psychosocial stress than bottle-feeding mothers. But more recent research has shown other roles for the hormone too. Oxytocin levels are high under stressful conditions such as social isolation and unhappy relationships. A major question in the field, therefore, is whether oxytocin operates differently when it's released in response to connective experiences and when it is released under stressful conditions. So there was this lady named Sue Carter. She's a PhD, co-director of the Brain and Body Center at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and one of the first to study oxytocin in animals. So research is also probing whether administering oxytocin short-term doses can induce different feelings such as trust and generosity. There's even a study that did a whole can oxytocin promote trust and generosity. It's interesting. But much remains to be seen about how studies integrate into the broader literature on the hormone in its natural state, says psychologist Shelley E. Taylor, PhD, who directs the University of California, Los Angeles Social Neuroscience Lab. So she says, these experimental paradigms don't necessarily mimic how oxytocin functions in the real world. Wow, words, right? She says, before we can produce an accurate model of oxytocin, we need to be able to reconcile the naturalistic plasma studies with the exogenous administration studies. So its role in affiliation. So new studies are adding to the body of literature that shows that oxytocin plays a key role in maternal bonding and social affiliation. So what Taylor has labeled the tend and befriend response, as opposed to the fight or flight response, which the fight or flight response is that fear center of the brain, the amygdala, the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, as some people say. So in line with years of animal research linking oxytocin to mothers' ability to care for their infants, a study in the November Psychological Association demonstrates this association for the first time in people. So in the study, psychologist Ruth Feldman, PhD of Barlin University, and her colleagues measured plasma levels of oxytocin in 62 pregnant women at 3 points. And those 3 points were during the first trimester, during the third trimester, and the first month postpartum. So the team found that women with higher levels of oxytocin in the first trimester bonded better with their babies. It also found that those with higher oxytocin levels throughout the entire pregnancy and in the first month postpartum reported more behaviors that supported the formation of exclusive relationships with their babies, such as singing special songs or bathing and feeding their infants in specific ways. Because of its role in birth and lactation, oxytocin was originally considered like a female hormone, but now it's known to be present in everybody. So likewise, recent animal studies demonstrate the developmental relationship between exposure to extra oxytocin early in life and subsequent material and social behaviors. So in August, the issue of Hormones and Behavior, this psychologist Karen Bales, PhD, University of California, and colleagues found that when they administered graded levels of oxytocin to female prairie voles shortly after birth, the animals in adulthood showed differential responses to pups, in this case belonging to other females. For instance, when they had received a low dose of oxytocin early in life, adult females were slow to approach pups. When they received higher doses of the hormone, they were more likely to care for them. Interesting. So human studies likewise confirm the notion that early experiences, possibly mediated by oxytocin, are related to later social behaviors. Finds a study that was reported in November of 2005. It was called the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. That's where it was. The University of Wisconsin-Madison doctoral student Allison Wismer-Fries and colleagues, what they did was they compared urine levels of oxytocin and a related hormone, let's see if I can pronounce it, vasopressin, in two sets of children. One of those sets was raised from birth with their biological parents, and one adopted after living in orphanage in Russia or Romania following contact with their mothers. The levels of oxytocin rose in the biological children, but remained the same in the adopted children, they found. These findings suggest there may be biological underpinnings for the observation that some adopted children, in particular those from deprived circumstances, have difficulty forming secure relationships despite living in loving homes, the team notes. And under social stress. Okay, so recent studies in both animals and humans support the notion that oxytocin is also a part of a response to a social separation and related stress. So a study reported in the March-April 2006 issue of the Psychosomatic Medicine by Taylor and colleagues found that women who reported more gaps in their social relationships and less positive relationships with their primary partners had higher levels of oxytocin and the stress hormone cortisol than those reporting better relationships. Meanwhile, research by UIC researchers Angela Grippo, PhD, Stephen Porges, PhD, and Carter. Stephen Porges has some good books. Anyway, they found elevated levels of oxytocin as well as other exaggerated stress responses in female prairie voles that had been separated from others. The research on voles suggests that when oxytocin is elevated under times of stress, externally administering the hormone may still mitigate these stress reactions. So in a study presented in the 2007 Society for Neuroscience meeting, Grippo, Porges, and Carter, I mentioned, compared the stress reactions of female prairie voles living for 4 weeks either in isolation with a female sibling and found greater levels of stress, behavioral anxiety, and depression, and those separated from their siblings. The team then gave the animals either oxytocin or saline every day during the last 2 weeks of the 4-week period. The isolated animals treated with oxytocin no longer showed signs of depression, anxiety, or cardiac stress. By contrast, oxytocin had no measurable effects on those paired with siblings, suggesting that the effects of oxytocin are most apparent under stressful conditions, is what Carter says. So, could externally administered oxytocin help people with social and emotional difficulties, stress, or deficits? Researchers think that's a definite possibility. So, in one study in the area, psychologist Eric Hollander, PhD of Mount Sinai School of Medicine, and his colleagues found that adults diagnosed with autism or Asperger's disorder who received oxytocin injections showed an improved ability to identify emotional content on a speech comprehension task, while those on the placebo did not. So there's a quote from the authors here. It says, "These findings suggest that oxytocin might facilitate some social processing in those with autism and provide preliminary support for the use of oxytocin in the treatment of autism. So other investigators are also examining the possible applications of social anxiety, schizophrenia, and depression. So let's bring some of those strands together. Well, the answers are certainly not all in. A possible reason for the roles that oxytocin appears to play is that it has dual purposes and pathways, is what they speculate. When it is operating during times of low stress, oxytocin physiologically rewards those who maintain good social bonds and feelings of well-being. But when it comes on board during times of high social stress or pain, it may lead people to seek out more and better social contacts, says Taylor. Taylor also considers possible physiological reasons for these differences. So in 2006, a paper in the Current Directions of Psychological Science, she speculates that actual or anticipated social contact may result in bursts of oxytocin. Exogenously giving oxytocin may operate in a similar manner, she notes. Exogenously is just coming from the outside. However, if a person is experiencing the stress of social deficits, he or she may show elevated levels of circulating oxytocin, that is, oxytocin already present in the bloodstream. This stress-related manifestation of oxytocin may produce physiological changes that then encourage people to seek contact with others, she surmises. Taylor is now examining these theories and others with people in the lab. So recent research from the UIC group I mentioned earlier supports an alternative hypothesis. There's lots of hypotheses in science. Everybody's trying to prove they're right. So this was first articulated by Porges in 1998, says Carter. He posited that oxytocin, acting through effects on the autonomic nervous system, might allow what he termed, quote, immobility without fear. In other words, oxytocin may in general protect the nervous system from shutting down in the face of stressful circumstances, especially those that require holding still rather than fighting or fleeing. That includes events that may seem positive from a societal standpoint, such as birth. So one clue this may be so: post-traumatic stress disorder is not usually associated with birth, although it is a tremendously stressful experience, says Carter. Oxytocin, she says, may play an important role in helping females manage both emotional and physiological responses during life-altering events such as childbirth, converting potentially stressful experiences into opportunities for expressing joy and love. So that's some pretty cool information about oxytocin. Hope you enjoyed what you heard today. If you want to support the show, click the button on the website. And remember, I appreciate each and every one of you simply for existing.